Hello and welcome to the Law Deals podcast, where we discuss law firm succession plans, profitable law partnerships, and law firm purchases and sales. I'm your host, Ed Alexander. I've practiced transactional business law for 30 years, have my own practice, Alexander Business Law, and am a principal with Fitzgibbon Alexander, a business intermediary firm. We're on a mission to make sales of law firms commonplace so you can enjoy your practice and your life. Hello and welcome to the Law Deals podcast. I'm your host, Ed Alexander, and with me today is Joy Lutz. Joy is a CPA and the owner of Aligned CPA, a firm that specializes in helping law firms and small and medium-sized businesses grow through strategic financial management. Joy and I first crossed paths during a law firm transaction where she demonstrated exceptional insight into the unique financial challenges that law firms face. What struck me about Joy's approach is how different it is from most CPA firms. Instead of just providing historical financial reports, Joy and her team were passionate about helping the law firm owner and all law firm owners understand their numbers and use them as powerful tools for growth and decision-making. So as someone who holds weekly financial review meetings in my own practice, I can attest to the transformative power of using numbers as leading indicators rather than lagging indicators. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit. Joy, welcome to Law Deals.
Thanks so much. I love that intro. You've made me sound really good, and thanks to the kind words on our services.
Well, it is absolutely true. We had a common client, and we worked together to get a transaction done, which was wonderful. But before we get into any of the details, tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background? How did you get to the point where you're at and specializing in law firm and small business accounting?
Yeah, so I will start with, from a young age, I would help my parents compile their information for their tax return. To say how old I am, I used to take my dad's checks that came with the bank statements and I put them into piles based on what he was paying. This is back when the bank gave me the check. That was a lot of fun, and that just kind of led to my career in accounting. I worked for a great CPA firm for about 13 years and then started my own firm, which I've had for about 12 years now. And our really approach is to help small business. Whatever that means to them, it's not just to compile records to do a tax return. We want them to use this data to make better decisions. And that's really where the aligned CPA wording came from, because I wanted to be able to help businesses align business with the goals they want to achieve and not just happen upon reaching a goal, doing it strategically.
Excellent. So 12 years, what's your team like there?
Yeah, so our team right now is a team of 8, looking for a team of 9. So if we have any CPAs listening, EAs, each one, we're looking for like a tax rock star. Right? And so we have a couple client managers who are the tax managers, a couple staff accountants, and then we have a sales and marketing department as well. And so that makes up our team of 8.
Oh, very good, very good. And so it's interesting to me, most people will not understand this, but you're in Lake City, Florida, which is a very, very small, I guess technically it's a city, but it's very, very small, and it's north of Gainesville up there. And so has that proved to create challenges around hiring people?
That's so funny that you bring that up. We finally made the decision our next hire will probably be remote. I have been trying for the past year to get a great person in this seat, and it just hasn't worked out. And so we're working with a recruiter now, and I started to offer it as a hybrid position, and we got some good candidates through that, but just realizing we've got to increase that job pool, so we're going remote. And I'm sure so many of your listeners are the same way. Oh, but if you want to grow, you have to do the things that are uncomfortable, because that's really what it was about, of like, oh my gosh, how am I going to even know who this person is? And it's just about that uncomfortable part of it. And he said to myself, so many other people have figured this out and made this work great for their business. I can do the same.
Right. I mean, it's really taking off in the legal space right now. So, I think, I've heard some people indicate that the front-facing positions should be positions that are local, but when it comes to the technical work in the back end, no problem having that be a remote position.
That makes a lot of sense.
Good. So I saw that you got an award in 2023 for Employer of the Year, which is fantastic. Tell us about that.
That was great. I said all along, there was every award I wanted to win. that would be it, because that award was basically based off of the culture that we built and the way that we work as a team, our core values, and how like we really live those every day. We hire based off of those. We hire clients based off of those. And, this is a place I tell candidates that I'm interviewing, like, you may spend more time at work than you do at home with your families. Like, you need to like the people you work. I'm never going to say over a family, because I just don't think that is true. But you will spend a lot of time with us, so you need to like people that you with, and everyone needs to pitch in and do their part and be a team player. And so the way that we basically won that award was from doing and living those things. So that was definitely an achievement. The fun part of that was the night of the award, I was out of town at a conference. And so my team was able to accept, and, they were just as happy.
Nice. Very nice. Yeah, no, I mean, the use of core values and that cultural component, it's atypical in the professional services industry in general, but boy, is it powerful when it's implemented properly. So congratulations.
Yeah, and that is so true, because think about that, like for law firm owners, that it's not typical. And so we're always looking at ways to differentiate ourselves. And that is one of them. And, because you think about that with law, tax is similar, like, how can I be different when we're really all doing the same thing, type thing? Like, let's say it's family, like, how do we really differentiate ourselves? And that comes down to your team and your values and your culture, because clients can feel whether your employees actually like working or not, and they're going to tell other people. And so that's just a great way to set yourself apart.
Oh, yeah. Nice. Well, let's talk about financial statements, growth, financial numbers, all those kinds of things. So in the law space, really, I guess it's probably every professional services firm, but what are the key financial metrics that law firm owners should be tracking either daily, weekly, monthly, or annually?
Yeah. And that's such a loaded question too, because it's going to depend on what their goals are. I would even back up a step and see, at a minimum, they should have monthly financials. And we even see a lot of firms that don't have those, or they do, but they're bad numbers. But the attorney doesn't know they're bad numbers, because that's not your area of expertise. And so the first at a minimum is making sure we've got financials that we can rely on, they're accurate, and they're timed. We don't need 6 months later, that type of thing, but we do need last month, and to do that regularly. So starting there and then figuring out, okay, where do we even want to go for the year? And that's how we're going to come up with those financial metrics. And I say this because you're going to have some firms that are mature firms and they are not aggressively trying to grow. Maybe they're growing, but not aggressively. And then you're going to have startup firms that are just hitting the ground running and they're aggressively trying to grow. Well, those financial metrics are going to be so different from each other. So, you have a business in the same industry with completely different metrics. So first it's backing up and figuring out where do we even want to go?
Right. Okay. So you lay out your goals. So typically, I'm going to say almost always, the law firm owner is not going to go, oh, well, I want a goal that is anything other than gross revenue or maybe number of matters, right? Or net profit or what I can pay myself, take out of the firm. So how are you pushing that now into metrics that need to be followed?
Yeah. So I think it starts with, we like to work with clients and say, well, where do you want to be in 3 years? And then let's back that up to 1 year. And now let's set the metric. And so for law firms, we see a lot of like number of new client matters that are revenue per employee. Because sometimes, you hear, like if you look this up on Google, it's always going to say revenue per partner, which we work mainly with smaller, medium-sized firms. And so that's really irrelevant, because you need to figure out too, you've got support staff, you've got paralegals, that it's not about revenue per partner or revenue per attorney. It's revenue per employee. So looking at those, looking at cash reserves, that's a big one too, because depending on what your growth plan is, do you have enough money to actually even achieve? Or, like, hey, in year 2, we want to do this. So how much money do we need to save in order to do that thing in year 2?
So there's so much to unpack there. So the first thing is the revenue per employee. Now, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, because the revenue per employee is, you have to take into account where you are, right? So I think you said this, right? So if you're a mega firm, your revenue per employee number is going to be substantially different than if you're a small firm. And then the revenue per partner issue there is what's your leverage, right? So if you're 1-to-1 or God forbid 0-to-1 being associate to, partner, then your number is going to be substantially different. And the partner number is probably going to be driving everything. And most firms should have that leverage component. So you could use a paralegal, you could use an associate, but it's a producer to owner ratio, right? Yeah, important stuff there. So basically as you're growing, right? And for a lot of firms, the billable hour is going away. Mm-hmm. And for those firms, you want to be pushing everything down to the lowest level of competency. And that's where you're going to get that leverage and the revenue per employee. But if everybody's a partner, it's going to be a completely different arrangement.
Right. Yeah. Well, and we've seen before where, we've got a firm measuring revenue per partner, but then they might have 5 support staff underneath them. And then you have another partner over here with 1 support staff. And so it's not, apples to apples. And so again, that just comes back to every firm is going to be different based on their setup, their goals, what they're looking to achieve, those things.
Yeah. And I think the practice area, really taking a look at that practice area and then norming that against what other firms of the same size are doing is so important to get that, kind of that data. It's not readily available. I mean, to some extent, it's talking to your peers.
Yes, especially at the smaller level. You can go and look up huge mega firms, but finding the small data is hard. We've tried piling that based on our client base, but that gets tricky because we have to make sure that we've got security in place and we're not sharing data that shouldn't be shared. And, clients are very confidential as they should be. And so we haven't done anything with that externally, but we know some of those.
That's great. So if I talk to my lawyer brethren and say, review your financial statement, they're going to say something to the effect of, I went to law school, I'm not a CPA. Tell us what's the strategic way to read a financial statement as the owner of a law firm? What are the key things I need to look at?
Yeah. So I would first say, do not even pull up the profit and loss first. We're not even going to go there. We're going to look at our balance sheet. And that's the thing that most people ignore. They don't know what it is. And it just shows you what you own and what's left over. So pretty simple. But the reason I say that is because if your balance sheet is incorrect, your profit and loss probably is too. And so that means then you're looking at bad numbers, you're making decisions off bad numbers, those things. And so balance sheet just tells your story also. You should be able to go down it. You're going to see all of your bank accounts, your receivables, any assets that you own, and then you're going to see who you owe money to. And so those balances need to be correct first and making sure that they're recorded. Because what we do find is, especially in smaller firms, that they may not yet have the resources to outsource this. And so they put in front of their bookkeeper, probably their receptionist, someone who says maybe they've used QBO, but really has no accounting or bookkeeping training or knowledge. In our field, we call it Sally, that bookkeeper is just going to do the same as last year. Which, if last year was bad, this year's going to be bad too. So you have to kind of consider that too. And the reason I say that is you have to think about who's doing these financials in your firm. Once we've figured out the balance sheet is accurate, then we're going to go to the P&L. And then I like to look at comparisons. So that can either be month to month or year to year, because then you can kind of start to see trends of, okay, our revenue is increasing, probably means our cost of labor is increasing. Are our operation expenses through the roof? If so, we need to get a handle on those. And just letting the financials tell you your story and then asking yourself, is this really our story? Does this make sense? In the effect of are these accurate?
Yeah. So one thing that I found when we, part of our process is taking the financial statements or tax returns of the firm and using them to determine what the true cash flow earning potential of the firm is for pricing mechanism. And I've seen some really bad financial statements. It's a tough conversation when you got to go back and you got to say, hey, I think this might not be right. You might want to talk to your accountant about it, that kind of thing. Definitely difficult to have that conversation. And as you say, you're right. It's either a paralegal or the receptionist, or God forbid the attorney themselves. That is the worst possible thing, right? So you look at these and tell me, where are those red flags? What are you seeing that go, okay, this is a mess?
Yeah. bank accounts haven't been reconciled. That should happen every single month. I don't know if I want to say this on here, but we see issues with trust accounts. And it's like, that's major, because your trust account needs to balance every single month. And that's going to be on your balance sheet as well. It's going to show your trust bank account, and then you should have a liability for the same exact amount. A lot of times we don't see those amounts the same. And so that gets into a much bigger issue. Another one is we don't see, like, if you have notes and you owe people money, we don't see those being adjusted every month, because part of those payments are probably principal and interest. So if those aren't adjusted, you're not going to have the correct expense on your profit and loss, meaning your net income's overstated.
Yeah, you can pretty much guarantee that those adjustments aren't being made until year end.
Yeah.
And anytime you get a mid-year financial balance sheet in particular, it's going to be far off. Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing with depreciation. So what that is when you buy fixed assets like a building, furniture and equipment, computers, those are depreciated over time. Our clients, we adjust those every single month. The reason we do that is because when our attorney is looking at his profit and loss, I want to make sure he's looking at a tax number. That way there's no surprises and, there's no questions of balances owed and stuff like that.
Yeah. So 2 important points there. One is the trust account piece. In Florida, most attorneys should know this, but unfortunately, I've seen a lot don't. You've got to keep individual accounts for each client. So you're supposed to have, in the old day, cards, but you should have an account that's updated every single month and then that has to balance. And you've got to keep the documentation showing that you've balanced it every single month. And as we all know, the quickest way to disbarment is through the trust account. And we definitely want to be careful about doing that. So really important point there. The other component is the issue of updating. So you have the accurate information about the balances due, right? Because at the end of the day, that and the amortization schedule are really important, because when you're paying off principal, that's not deductible, right?
Yeah. So that's caused that tax difference. And like I said, we want our clients to be informed, of what their bill is going to be. So if that note's really large, let's say you bought a practice and it's $1 million, that's going to be a pretty large principal reduction each month, hopefully. And that's going to affect your ability to basically pay your taxes. So you have to factor that in budgeting.
I've seen instances where attorneys have gotten a nice case fee, settlement and that kind of thing. And they go down and pay down the credit line. And then they're looking at it going, oh my God, how come that's not deductible?
One of those right now this week.
Well, it happens way too often. All right. So in terms of, you get the financial statements in order. And now how do you turn that into using that information as a leading indicator for the firm?
Yeah. So again, it goes right back to those goals of where we want to be. I think I got this from Strategic Coach years and years ago, and it's their method of basically saying, hey, if you were sitting here 3 years from now, what would have to happen for you to feel very successful? So kind of the same thing. If we're sitting here a year from now and you have reached your goal, what has to have happened for you to reach that? So then we're going to figure out what those actions are and apply metrics to. So that's where it comes down to, a lot of this comes down to like marketing and sales, which I know as attorneys, you think I'm not a salesperson, but you really are, because you're selling yourself. People are buying you, not even your service. And so it's figuring out, okay, if we want to raise our revenue $150,000, how many new clients do we need for the year? Okay, well, how many do we need for the month? And then it's even staggering that because, months are different. Like for us in the world, it's crickets July, August, and September for new clients because they're taking summer vacations. This is the last thing you're worried about. But come December, January, it is just crazy. And so you're going to adjust those KPIs by the month of what you're really expecting. Because what that means is if we hit this KPI target every single month, when we get to the end of the year, we should have reached our goal. And so figuring out what the goal is and then how we're going to get there is going to drive that KPI. The same thing for, like let's say you really want to work. So a lot of those KPIs are going to be around marketing. So number of new matters opened, marketing dollars spent. For me, I will track like number of speaking events because the more I'm in front of people, the more prospects we're going to have. And then we can even get really far into depth of like we have a salesperson. And so it's, how many discovery consults did she have? How many proposals did she deliver? How many were actually closed? So you can see it's like a ton of stuff, but it's really not once you figure out what is the goal. Where are we trying to go?
So basically what you're talking about is activity-based goals, not the outcome-based goals, right? Because we can't control profit. Profit at the end of the day is a result of revenue and expenses, right? But we can control the inputs. What we're doing is we're setting up these activities that we're going to undertake on a regular basis, and then we're going to look and determine, are they having the correct effect? And over an appropriate period of time, because you speaking at an event is not going to bring in a client tomorrow, but we're going to see that 3, 6, 9 months down the road as people remember and they say, oh yeah, I need to get that going. And that is just from a marketing perspective, why having a newsletter, a printed newsletter, is so important. Now, it's a little bit off topic, but it's one of the things I harp on all the time, because it really is about getting out there and staying in front of people who have to develop a relationship with you so they remember who you were. Because if you spoke to an event and, if you're speaking to the solo and small firm committee meeting in January, none of them are going to remember you in February unless they get something from you.
Yeah. And the benefit of all of that is, imagine the data you have over time when you track these for a year, 2 years, and you can really start to pinpoint when something's going to happen. You can start to see, okay, I have to do 3 speaking engagements to get this size of client or to get this number of client. And when you know those numbers, that's what's powerful, especially if you have these firms that they want to sell in 3 to 5 years, even in 1 year. But I would really encourage people, like, if you want to sell in 3 years, like, you need to start that today, not in 1 year, not a month before, because you can start to improve all of these numbers and then you're going to get a higher sales. And so most attorneys, they're selling their firm is their return. And so you want to increase that as much as possible.
Right. So I think the key there is you're 100% right. Selling in 1 year is difficult at best, and you're probably not going to realize the full value of the firm, right? But in selling, if you're looking at selling, you say it's 3 to 5 years, you've got some time to plan. You've got some time to work your way out of any problems that you've created. And especially if you don't have somebody looking at your financials now, you get somebody and now you can really work through it. Good. So let's kind of talk about that tax planning strategies, right? So nobody wants to pay more taxes than they have to. How are you helping law firms and small businesses do their tax planning strategies? When do you start? What does it take? All of those things.
I love how you phrase that, because most of the time it is problems we have created ourselves. We tend to complicate things.
Right. No, 100%. So in terms of the tax component there, one of the things that I've seen so many times is where they don't realize they have to pay estimated taxes, number one. And number two, they don't pay themselves an appropriate salary, right?
Yeah. Well, the first part is the part that nobody likes, and that's working on the mindset around taxes. I tell people taxes are a sign of building wealth. If you want to become wealthy, you're going to pay taxes. Do not get your tax advice from TikTok, all of these places. We're not trying to drive our number to zero, because here is what we see happen in real world. People do not want to pay any taxes. They drive that profit to nothing, and now they want to sell. Well, or even worse too, now they want to get a loan to grow. Well, they can't do that either. And so you're really pigeonholed there, because you're saying in paper, and a lender's not going to give you money and a buyer is not going to give you money. So taxes, you have to start with that mindset. If you want to build wealth, you want to be successful, you're going to pay tax. Now, it's my job to make sure it's the least amount legally possible. And so that really is a full year activity. That's something that we work with clients and only on a monthly basis. And so that means that we're looking at your accounting month. We're looking at your tax plan every quarter. We're making adjustments. Like, we're doing year-end meetings right now. We've been doing those for the past month and a half, just to make sure what we think is going to happen is really happening. And so it's not a one-time event. It's a year-long And so that's probably my dig on taxes, is getting more comfortable with that, because I know that we see on social media that, the wealthiest people don't pay taxes. And that's just not true.
Yeah, that's for sure. So let's just back up to reasonable compensation. So just let's set the stage for that, because some listeners may not be fully in that. So if you have a pass-through entity, which is typically going to be an S Corp or an LLC electing S status, for those who have law firms, those are typically either a professional corporation, or in Florida, a professional association, or a professional limited liability company. So you've made an S election, and that means that it's a pass-through, and so that you are paying the taxes on that. And so everybody wants to avoid paying anything more, so they pay themselves $30,000 a year or some ridiculous number like that. And the measure of that is quite different. So what are you looking at? You use the term reasonable compensation. So what are you looking at to determine that?
Yeah. And those, especially that number 2, is tied on the IRS rate. That's one of the first things that we go after. And we even have a software that'll help us calculate like what is reasonable compensation. That way we have something to rely on, and we're not just picking a number out of thin air. And so, but let's back up first to the estimated taxes. And that wasn't a huge deal over COVID years, because IRS interest rate was like 2%. And now it's up to 8%, and the penalties have been the same the whole time, but the interest rate is up. And so if you're not paying estimated taxes, or you're not paying your taxes by 8%, that interest rate is killer right now. And so it's so important. And it's not only important financially because you're going to have less interest and penalties. It's important for habits, because we want to build a habit of making a quarterly payment so that when we look at our bank account, we know what's left over is ours. It doesn't belong to us. Whereas, if you're not paying all year long, you're looking at inflated bank balances, because what you owe the IRS is not going to go away, unfortunately.
No, not at all. So, I mean, basically the difference, because you're the owner of the firm, when you're paying FICA and Medicare, is that 15.4%.
That difference too, it comes down to Social Security and Medicare. So we use a cost approach, and what that is it's and new clients do an interview style questionnaire, and they're talking about the things, where do they spend their time? The reason we do this is because our it's going to come in a little bit lower than if you were just a full-time attorney. And so we want our clients to put in, well, what hours are you spending doing admin? What hours are you spending in management? Are you cutting the yard? Those types of things, because those are going to be lower values. And then you're also going to put in your hours for practicing law, and those are going to be higher values. And so that study is going to give us a reasonable comp range and say, okay, based off all of your answers in this information, including your industry and location, here's the comp that we suggest. And so now we have a method of how we came up to our number, which is what's the most important to the IRS. They want to know how you can make this number. And if I see $24,000 one more time, that's the number that attorneys want to pay. Not even attorneys. I won't even blame you guys. It's basically everyone. And I don't know why 20 just seems to be the going number, but I know I can't live off that. So I doubt that you could either. So I don't know why anyone thinks that's reasonable. That's the big difference, because you're going to pay it as an employee, but then as the employer, you're going to manage it. And so that's why it becomes to be a big number. And what your listeners really need to make sure that they understand is, as for the tax return, there is a single line for compensation of officers on the front page. And so I tell people, if there's something on the front page of a tax return, it's important to the IRS. If you have nothing on that line, your audit risk just went through the roof. So at a minimum, pay some. But really to have, again, this comes down to selling too. If you're underpaying yourself and you're trying to sell your firm, it's not going to be valued as high, because a new firm owner would have to hire another attorney to replace you. And so you need that salary to show kind of apples to apples. So that's why it's really important. You don't want to be on the IRS radar at a minimum.
Yeah, nobody wants to be or should want to be.
I don't want to be.
One thing about selling the firm too is that if you're doing an internal sell, so you're selling to an employee or maybe a partner or something like that. I mean, this audit risk is staying with the firm as you're selling it, because you're selling the entity, you're not selling the assets of the firm. So another factor that can create risk for the buyer. And, you should want the buyer to be successful because ultimately that's how you're going to get paid in a lot of cases here.
Yeah. The other thing about, let's just touch on tax strategy a little bit. It can be a little difficult in law firms because you're a service-based business. If you collect the money, you're going to pay tax on it. You have other industries like construction or real estate where there's a lot of moving parts. When you do professional services, a lot of it is what it is. If you collected the money, you're going to pay. So we want to find ways that we can kind of put money into other buckets to reduce the tax bill, but it's still our money. So those are things like retirement plans, HSA plans, and things that it's still our money. It's just set aside in a different bucket.
Yeah, so tax deferral in most of those cases rather than tax avoidance. But the beauty of that is, if you're a high earner now and you're going to take it out at a point where you're a low earner or earning less, then in theory, your tax rate should be lower. I'm not predicting the future. It's just in theory.
Well, and I'll say, it's been a not fun year doing tax planning. Really had no idea what's going to happen with the election. And there was 2 very different tax plans that the candidates were talking about. And so that makes tax planning really hard. So we're glad to have the election through and we know what to expect. But you pointed that out really good is the fact that tax planning is not about just this year. It's about multiple years because we do want to see hey, where are you going to be next year or where are you going to be when you retire? Because we want to look at those tax rates to see is it lower now than later? Because most people don't believe this, but our tax rates are historically low compared to you go back to the 80s and you would just be blown away at some of those rates. And so you have to strategize around the years as well.
Yeah, we go back to the 50s when they were 70. On the high earners. Yeah, it's crazy. They're all, of course, graduated. So it's not 70% of $1, but yes, that was the marginal rate. Yeah. No, that's good. All right. So, we're coming to the end here. And I just would what would be your number one piece of financial advice for a law firm owner who is, thinking about maybe they're 55 and they're saying, I got 10 years in this, right? What's the best thing that they can do right now financially?
So what I would say first, and I actually did this for my CPA firm, is meet with someone like yourself and say, what are the best firms sell? What are those metrics that made that price so high? And then figure out, okay, how can I get to those metrics? That's exactly what I did and to me in the CPA world, it's around recurring revenue. It's around having employees and not being the sole practitioner. It's around monthly clients versus tax return only clients. And so I was able to take that data and say, okay, well, if I want to sell in 10 years, my year is 13. If I want to sell in 13 years, I'm going to improve all of these metrics and kind of keep an eye on it too, because obviously industries change. So maybe, in years I'll go back and do the same thing and say, what's the best money? The second thing is I think that we tend to not do the things that we don't feel confident at. So I find a lot of attorneys who they don't understand the financial information and maybe there's some shame. So they tend to ignore. And ignoring it is not going to make it better or go away. It's kind of the same thing with, you get a new case and you can't ignore it if you don't know what to do with it. You still have to figure it out. And at the end of the day, that's part of being the business owner. You know that you may not understand right now, but you have the power to figure it out. And so this whole financial strategy too is just like a strategy that you're going to get a new case and you're going to develop a strategy on how you're going to handle it and how that case is going to play out. What's the best outcome? What's the goal for the case? We're just going to do the same thing with our finances. And so you want to make sure that you're looking at it regularly. And then if you someone else that's preparing these, I like to say, get that person to explain them to you, because that's going to do two things. It's either going to show you that person doesn't know what they're doing, or it's really going to help you because that person does know and now you're going to start it. And so either one of those are great answers. And just get familiar with what's on the financials. And then once you're comfortable with that, go into start developing goals, start developing KPIs. and thinking more strategically about financial.
Yeah. So, 100%, that is absolutely perfect. The one thing I would add to that is that in business, the numbers are everything, right? I couldn't imagine playing a sport without having a score and without keeping metrics around various things like what the players are doing, what's working, what's not working. And that's the only way that you can truly approach any business, is looking at what are the results, and the results are numbers. And those numbers have to translate into action, either to enhance what's going on or to change what's going on. So yeah, good stuff. Absolutely. And then I wanted to point out, you were kind enough to give me a book. That book is great for people who are really trying to, digest the numbers in their practice, frankly, in their business, but in their practice as well. I don't know if you have it handy because I don't have it, but I can put the description put the book name in the description. Do you remember the book name?
I'm assuming that when you say about simple numbers.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. That is a great book. It was actually written by a CPA, but it helps you understand numbers. My favorite part of that book is the budgeting process, because what he teaches you to do is budget from the bottom up and not the top down. Because you have to figure out, okay, how much do you want to make? And then you figure out, okay, well, how much revenue do we have? And then what's left over is what you can spend on operating. Typically, we do it backwards, where we say, this is how much revenue and so much expense, and this is what's going to be left over, hopefully. And so that book is really good at teaching you some simple concepts that can really change your firm.
The other book that attorneys always like is Profit First by Mike Michalowicz. And so I guess, if you don't have a budget that you would run with, right? That's a good way to do it, because you're backing into it. And it's good for people who are scared of numbers.
Yeah, I love Profit First as well. Sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. And so what I tell clients is, let's just start with one bank account and let's put a percentage in. Let's put 5% of revenue. Let's put 1% of revenue, because you want to do that. And you definitely want to have the tax bank account. That way, these quarterly estimates that we talk about aren't a big deal, because you're moving money in there and it's there when you need it.
So Joy, I believe you guys are rolling out a podcast of your own going forward. Tell me about it.
Yeah. We are. We're super excited about that. We're rolling that out in January, and it's going to be called Leadership and Leverage. So we're going to talk about finances and KPIs and metrics and goals and all that fun stuff. But I really wanted to blend that in with leadership, because I can tell you, for me, going from a solo practitioner to a 7-figure earner, there is so much that I had to learn, and it changes, when you're at 250 versus $1 million, you need different leadership skills, especially if you want to grow a team and you want to have employees, if you need to be a better leader for them. And so I also want to talk about the challenges. One thing that I've really struggled with is it can be really hard to grow a business and nobody's talking. And so for me, I had a struggle, and I had a business coach, and I kept saying, why is this so hard for me, but not for everyone else? And she was like, it is hard for everyone else. They're just not talking about it. So I really wanted to talk about it. These are the things that have kept me up at night, or these are the things that I've been concerned about. And these are the things we've done and did not work, because those are the things that everyone kind of sweeps under the rug. Those are the things that make us better leaders. And so we really want to share those stories. So number one, our listeners can know, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm doing great. And number two, we want it to be very impactful, so that each episode, there is something that you can do in your firm or in your business that is going to make a difference. Because if you start to do those and over time you've done, 10 little tweaks, that's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, it's interesting. You say that's kind of the issue of, my wife says to me, when I say that, oh, they're doing so great, she'll go, yeah, everybody lies. So do not believe social media 100%. The other part of that is, as I'm sure you've experienced, we experience too, because we get to see the inside workings of businesses, and, it's the duck on the pond, right? So it looks very gracious on the top, but below, those feet are going pretty heavily. So it's very, very good. I look forward to listening to it, to subscribing. So definitely let us know when is it going to come out?
We're going to launch it in January. And I'd love to have you on after for a little while, and you can share your insights too.
Good. Excellent. All right. So how can listeners learn more about Align?
You can definitely find Aligned I'm very active on LinkedIn, love having business conversations. So you can find me there just under Joy Lutz CPA, I believe. We have a YouTube channel too. So if you want some education, free resources, I think that's a good place to go. But ultimately, you can always find us on our website. And that's going to talk more about kind of what we do and how we work, because like we talked a little bit before, we do have a very different model where our mission is to help our clients, not even our clients, but small businesses in general, thrive, grow, and reach their goals. And so we've developed our processes and our systems to really help our clients do that. And you can find out information about that on our website of how we.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. And I look forward to talking to you again. Thanks.
Oh, this has been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.